So, I think it's best for me to kind of talk about, try and start at least talking about some of the bits and bobs I was on my last episode, the last video I did, which was essentially, talking about the comic thing, the Nightmare of Nature sort of thing. Um, Unfortunately, I'm still working on it, strangely enough. But I'm not going to explain the chapters, as obviously it's a bit, they're kind of complex a little bit, and it doesn't help also that I kind of don't know where I'm going to go towards it at the moment, so, yeah. Anyways, so what I'm actually going to do is related to the Nightmare of Nature comic. I'm going to talk about the bios of essentially each character that's going to be related or be represented in the story, essentially. Starting off with the main, essentially the main character, which is Matt Marshall, or also known as in a certain military division as Sabre. So, I'll start off in the simplistic department. To letting people understand. Matt Marshall was essentially born in the United Kingdom in the 1980s, in the very early 1980s, and he he was in a family with his mother and father, and he was the only child essentially in his family. His mother was essentially a normal houseworker, whilst his father was a engineer and worked on just essentially cars and stuff. Simple as that. However, there was one thing that he wanted. His father's side of the family, anyways, wanted that Matt Marshall was actually interested in. His grandfather on his father's side was a military personnel during World War II, and he actually worked. He was one of the soldiers that was actually in D-Day, and he was actually one of the first soldiers that landed on the beach and actually crossed over over towards the cliffs without really getting injured or getting shot, essentially. So he was a very good soldier and actually worked really well. However, the event within Matt Marshall's family was unfortunately a bit dire. So much so to the point where he actually wanted to leave and actually never got along with his parents at all. There was one thing though that he actually wanted to be though when he got told by his father and mother what he wanted to be. He wanted to be part of. He wanted to be essentially a pilot, so that he could explore new countries essentially. Unfortunately though, with what's going to transpire was something that he wasn't able to do nor combat. So let's get on to that. In 1986, he was 6 years old, obviously, at this time. And as we all know, in 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster happened. This made Matt Marshall's. He got locked into his house due to his family being a bit overprotective at this point. At this point as well as he was actually starting off in school, and he never got along with anyone. In fact, he never got along with anyone simply because of his interests. Now, that may sound sad, and yes, it is very sad, and unfortunately this has happened to a lot of people. Even in my case, I've been judged quite a bit, and never really got a lot of people not a lot of people, but essentially there was a lot of people in my young youth times that never actually had any interest or liked me at all simply because of my interests. And yes, again, this is actually carried on from primary school all the way up to high school and then college. Now, that hasn't happened as much, essentially. What has happened on Matt Marshall's side of things was that his parents constantly bickered and fighted over silly things, essentially. And this made Matt Marshall go a little bit crazy. So crazy, in fact, that throughout his entire school life, he had an imaginary friend with him that would unfortunately cause a lot of stress on his mind, but also bring him false hope, as in something on the lines of, oh, you're going to get new friends eventually, but you may not as well as, or something. And then there was actually one case where Matt Marshall even questioned his teacher about this situation that he was in, and then the teacher claimed, well, that's, although it's not really any of his business, a lot of people actually respect the guy, but just doesn't like to talk to him much. Which made Matt Marshall a little bit like, oh, alright, that's fine, I'll just leave it be. When he turned 18, however, he had the choice of going to either college or get a job, or the third option, which he talked about to his parents, but they didn't like it, he wanted to join the army. He joined the army anyways. He wanted to move away from his family at least one point in his life. At this point, as well as just after he joins the army, his mother and father divorced and left. Strange enough, my Marshall never got told about this until it was too late. But, hey, there yet. So, at this point, this is the 90s, and during this point, the whole Middle Eastern conflict has started off between the terrorists that threaten the United States and the West, the rest of the Western countries like England, France, Germany, and all that shit. Matt Marshall essentially was a very nice, chilled out guy, but very, very quiet. He never talked much, unless he was getting questioned by one of his soldiers or his commander in question. However, he was very quick to essentially get the job done. There was one case, and this is actually where he gets his name, Matt Marshall, the name Sabre, essentially. He essentially got the nickname Sabre from simply, well, how do I put this? He essentially went up to a nice, young, small little cafe in the Middle East, in the middle of nowhere, where 4 terrorists armed with Scorpion SMG machine pistols and threatened to actually kill everyone in that cafe if he didn't come with them. Matt Marshall was off duty at the time, and all he had on him was a sidearm and just his body armor. That was it. What he didn't have, however, was a plan. Matt Marshall doesn't normally have plans when it comes to certain situations. He just gets into it immediately. What he did was something that no one in the cafe and terrorists never expected. What he did was killed these 4 terrorists with a blade. No guns, that was it, just a knife. He disarmed them, nice and simple, and then slashed their throats with a blade. Everyone in that cafe and everyone in that small village actually nicknamed him the Assassin because he was very quiet and killed everyone with a swift of a knife. However, with Matt Marshall, with Matt Marshall on the other hand, with his regiment, he actually got the nickname Sabre because of the blade that he used. That was it. And yes, this is where this is where the 20th century comes into play. Although he was, again, quiet, he got the chance to join the SAS, which he took quite quickly, because again, it was more time away from his family, and it was more time for him to essentially get along with new people, and, save his country, essentially. He was the one person in his entire group that was essentially more geared to protect his country instead of geared to protect his family. Everyone in that group of 5, essentially, they wanted to help protect their family. He was the only person in that entire group that essentially wanted to protect his country. And this became a major factor in 2009, where, if you guys haven't heard, well, I haven't actually explained this, in 2007 to 2008, at this point in this universe, keep that in mind, a terrorist organization that was related to the Nazis essentially tried to threaten to wipe out the Eastern Europe bloc again. Keep this in mind, this was after the Cold War, and the Soviet Union was dissolved, and every country in the Soviet Union became its own entity. Ukraine was one of them, and there was one event that made these people wanted to wipe out the Eastern Bloc again. The Chernobyl power plant. This was a threat that this could have been the worst disaster of all of mankind if they got away with it. Essentially their plan was to essentially kill themselves, but it was enough to essentially wipe out all of Eastern Europe. Poland, dead. Belarus, dead. Eastern Germany, dead. Most of England, dead. You can't do anything about that at this point. However, there was one thing that people of all of Europe actually did, and they kept an eye on these terrorists. Unfortunately, though, it was too late. In 2009, they actually turned up with gas masks, rifles, M9 pistols, everything, and essentially raided the Chernobyl plant. This was at points as well as this was when they actually tried to make the arch to go over reactor number 4. However, they weren't after reactor number 4. They were after reactor number 2 and 3. Since reactor 1 was actually taken out of commission and actually been, taken apart, reactor number 2 and 3 were the only ones essentially there, and still in operation, but in operational conditions. And this what got their attention quite severely, unfortunately. Throughout this one event, or in other cases, Operation Shattered Glass, Matt Marshall got this operation sorted out with only one person with him, and that was Viktor Baranov, a Ukrainian soldier, or Ukrainian/Russian soldier, that he actually loved as a friend quite a bit. And this is where, after this point, the main story comes into play, but we'll actually talk about that when we finish off talking about the other characters. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys actually are interested with Matt Marshall. If you do, well, let me know what you think about him. Again, he's a very calm individual, gets the job done, but also very shy, quiet, and obviously had a tragic past. So, let's see if we can get this series sort of thing over with, I guess. I hope you guys, like I said, enjoyed this video. Like, comment, whatever, same thing. I'll speak to you guys all next time.